Hey nerds, just Jamie here with
your friend Claude.
And this is Nerd Bomber vs. Movies, the show where two movies fight and we pick a winner. Now, judging from our apparel, you may think today's episode is about Bigfoot or other cryptids, perhaps about Star Wars or other science fiction movies. I mean, it is about science fiction movies, but it's not about Star Wars. It's about, hang on to your butts, radio astronomers.
Specific.
Yes. The movies today are 1996's The Arrival and 1997's Contact. These are both movies I've seen many times, and I think this pairing was mostly my idea. So before I get into that a little bit, do you have any initial thoughts about these movies?
Not many. In fact, so few that this was the closest shirt I had that was relevant. It's kind of space related. And so are these movies. For this episode, I saw both of these movies for the first time ever. And every thought you hear will be my initial thoughts.
All right. And as a kid, I kind of saw them as somewhat equal just because of the subject matter.
Yeah.
But now it's obvious that I don't want to give too much away about the scoring, but let's just say that these movies take very different approaches coming from the same sort of motivating events at the very beginning. So we'll see where that goes. But before we do that, first I've got to do the basics. So in just a second, Claude's going to move aside, and I'm going to take the center chair. All right, as promised, here I am with the basics. We're going to start with Arrival from 1996, not to be confused with 2016's Arrival, that is, starring Amy Adams. This one is The Arrival. As director, we have David S2-E. He's known mostly actually for the Pitch Black movie and its sequels. He also did Half Baked. As a writer, he worked on Terminal Velocity and Waterworld. Next up, we have the writers. Again, we have David S2-E. And again, he's known for all the same stuff I just mentioned. Doing the music for this film, we have Arthur Kemple. He's known for Double Impact and a lot of B movies. I encourage you to look into it because there's an awful lot there. It's very interesting, but it's too much to go into right here. Moving into the cast, starring as Zane Zeminski, we have Charlie Sheen. Charlie Sheen is most known for Hot Shots Part 2, Terminal Velocity again, Wall Street, and he's done a bunch of sitcoms as well. Starring as Lana Green, we have Lindsay Krause. She is known mostly for Slapshot, Prefontaine, and Crawl, so that's kind of an interesting mix right there. Starring as Char, we have Terry Polo. She's known for Meet the Parents, Aspen Extreme, Domestic Disturbance, and she was a regular on the TV show Northern Exposure, one of my mother's favorite shows. All right, next up, starring as Phil Gordon, we have Ron Silver. He is known from Romancing the Stone, Time Cop, and Blue Steel. The working title for this film when it was in production was Shockwave. S2-E had written it and recruited Sheen after having worked together on Terminal Velocity. It was always intended for Charlie Sheen to play the role of Zane. The film was shot mostly in Mexico, and additional scenes, that is, were shot at the Owens Valley Radio Observatory in order to get that, real life look. All right, in terms of pop culture footprint for this movie, meh. Critical reviews were actually okay. I mean, it was kind of mixed to competent. It still spawned a direct-to-video sequel starring Patrick Muldoon from Starship Troopers. There was a Windows video game released the next year, but not much else in the way of merchandise. The movie didn't maintain much of a presence in the sci-fi canon, so to speak. There really isn't much of a cult following now, and there's no indication of any revisit to this franchise coming in any form. All right, next up we have Contact from 1997. Directing here, we have a big name this time, Robert Zemeckis. He's known for Romancing the Stone. We'll mention that again. But of course, there's also Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Forrest Gump, the Back to the Future trilogy, and others. He became known kind of recently as a guy who directs big-budget effects comedies, which is not a huge genre in Hollywood. In terms of writing, the screenplay, we have James V. Hart. He's known for Hook and Bram Stoker's Dracula. And he worked with Michael Goldenberg, who's known mostly for Harry Potter, The Order of the Phoenix, and the Green Lantern movie starring Ryan Reynolds. The movie, of course, is based on Carl Sagan's work. He gets story credit here. He's known for Cosmos and Pale Blue Dot, and his wife, Ann Druyan, also gets credit. And the whole thing, of course, is based on the novel Contact by Sagan. All right, music. We have Alan Silvestri. He has collaborated very often with Zemeckis, but he also has worked on things like The Predator, The Abyss, and several MCU movies, including The Avengers. Moving on now, we'll talk about the cast for Contact. Starring as Dr. Eleanor Arroway, or Ellie, is Jodie Foster. She's known for Silence of the Lambs, Summersby, Maverick, Nell, a lot of other things. Jenna Malone plays a young Ellie in some flashback scenes. Starring as Palmer Joss, we have Matthew McConaughey. He's, of course, known for Dazed and Confused, but also some serious movies like Time to Kill, Amistad, Interstellar, and he kind of made waves in True Detective Season 1. Starring as Theodore Arroway, Ellie's father, is David Morse. Morse is known mostly from The Green Mile and The Rock, but he's very recognizable and you know him as soon as you see him. Playing Dr. David Drumlin is Tom Skerritt, another very recognizable guy, known mostly for things like Alien, Top Gun, and Picket Fences on TV. Playing Michael Kitts, we have another very recognizable name here, James Woods, known for Ghost of the Mississippi, Videodrome, a bunch of other things. I like to think about John Carpenter's Vampires, not exactly a high spot. Playing S.R. Haddon is John Hurt. He's known for Alien and Hellboy, along with many, many other movies. Playing Kent Clark, the cleverly named Kent Clark, is William Fichtner. He's known for Heat and Black Hawk Down, among others. And again, there's a big cast here. That's why I'm not listing a lot of credits, but also appearing in roles here, you have Angela Bassett, Jake Busey, Rob Lowe, Max Martini. A lot of recognizable names and a lot of recognizable faces in this one. All right, so although this film is based on the novel, Sagan had actually first conceived of the story as a film as early as 1979, but it has switched prospective producers and directors over the years. It remained in development hell for over a decade, almost 2 decades in fact. And when production was finally started, Sagan was very involved to ensure maximum realism in the science. Of course, he is legit in astrophysics. He wanted to make sure it was the most realistic when it was the most beneficial, but he was also willing to stretch reality, of course. Shooting was conducted at the Very Large Array in New Mexico, the Arecibo Radio Telescope in Puerto Rico. There was also shooting done in Fiji, Canada, and at Warner Brothers Studios. Unfortunately, Carl Sagan passed away before the movie was finished, and at the end credits you see the dedication for Carl when the movie concludes. All right, pop culture footprint. Reviews were favorable for this movie, though not spectacular for the film as you might expect. It did pretty well at the box office, again, as you'll see in a minute. It was often compared in its time with things like Close Encounters of the Third Kind for its more philosophical look at science fiction storytelling. And this was in an era where that was a little less common than it is today. There's more of that now than there was. There was never much in the way of merch for this movie, and there still isn't. Today there isn't really a huge cult fandom, but the movie lives in the ether of a certain branch of Carl Sagan fandom, and it lives on in the words of Druyan, guys like Neil deGrasse Tyson, and people who believe in something called the cosmic perspective, which is a way that Sagan kind of looked at the world and our place in it. So that's it for the basics. In just a second, I'm going to leave the center spot, and Claude's going to take over with the tale of the tape.
Greetings, fight fans and movie buffs. Welcome to tonight's Tale of the Tape for our main event of the evening between Contact and The Arrival. Well, even when we're dealing with space and the great unknown, we start with the distributing studio. For The Arrival, we have a not legendary but infamous studio that I don't know that we've actually seen much on this show, but it was ubiquitous for a time in Hollywood, and that is good old Orion Pictures. For Contact, however, it's Warner Brothers. There's nothing much more that needs to be said. It's a household name for decades upon decades. As far as the ratings, they're a little bit mismatched. The Arrival is a PG-13 movie, and Contact is rated PG. Running time is where the mismatch starts to widen the gap a bit. The Arrival clocks in at 115 minutes. It's that kind of standard popcorn movie length with a little extra. Contact, however, a stout 150 minutes. And back over to The Arrival, it was released upon the world on May 31st, 1996, and Contact came out on July 11th of 1997. Nearly a year apart, yet they seemed like neck-and-neck competitors at the time. And perhaps the biggest area that our competitors are mismatched in will be the budget and the money that they made or did not make. For The Arrival, $25 million was spent making this movie. For Contact, they spent a little more. Nearly 4 times more. $90 million is the budget for Contact. But let's see how they performed. The Arrival, on a budget of $25 million, took in a little over half. $14 million. It's not exactly what you call profitable. Contact, however, on a budget of $90 million, nearly doubled it, coming in at $171 million. One of these is looking a bit more heavyweight than the other, but it ain't over till it's over. So let's open the doors and settle some scores.
All right, we are both back at the table, and it's time to talk about actual scores. We are going to start with visuals, and we are going to start with The Arrival. I'm giving The Arrival a score of 4 for visuals. That's not great. It's actually not good. It's actually not even average in terms of how our scoring spectrum works.
Downright bad?
Kind of bad. I just think this movie, for the most part, its reach exceeded its grasp. It tried to do things that it wasn't actually able to do for the budget and the resources and the skills that they had, apparently. I feel like if this was a science fiction made-for-TV movie in the 90s, you'd say, like, wow, they did pretty good for a TV movie. But this was a theatrical release, so they didn't, it falls a little short. There are a lot of special effects shots of aliens and alien technology and the alien headquarters, I guess, the big machine. A lot of those shots don't really work. They tend to be blurred. They tend to be out of focus. They don't move very well. There's one selection of shots that shows like sort of a close-up of an alien morphing into sort of its human disguise. And that was pretty well pulled off, but I think that's sort of like where all the resources were sunk, because after that, everything else seemed underwhelming to me. And even a lot of the shots that didn't include a lot of big special effects just seemed the sets and the locations seemed very small and limited. The lighting was uninteresting. The framing and the cinematography seemed uninteresting. Like I said, it had a very sort of like halfway decent, if this was a TV movie type of look to it, again, from its era. And I just think it falls a little short of what it wanted to do. And I come away giving it a score of 4.
I agree with nearly everything, except I feel more strongly about the positives that there are.
All right.
Which means that my score is quite higher. I give the visuals a 7. I guess because, one, I had never seen it before, didn't know what to expect, and it did not do what I expected with the visuals and the production design and some of the effects choices. So I guess I feel like I give it credit for surprising me a little bit.
Okay.
It is true that there are limitations, especially when watching this through a 2023 lens. The sets and the areas that they have to work in are pretty small and confined, but I thought it was interesting that they don't have this expansive soundstage, but because they're more confined, they go up. You get it on levels instead of like a large space. So I thought they worked with that pretty well. They built these unique looking areas within this like multi-leveled underground space. And it's not quite clear if it's a ship or just something that they've like built once they've landed on Earth, and maybe that also provides some of the interest, some of the intrigue, I guess. You get like an area where like the aliens are in these kind of movable chairs that are kind of also rotating and spinning. You don't get a lot of time with that, so they're very economical with the amount of it they give you, but I think they had to be. I think that was kind of smart. They give you enough to say, I don't know if I've seen something like that before, and then move on. So I give them credit for ingenuity within the visual effects and the production design that they need to pull off. And along those same lines, the design of the destruction orb
Yes.
that they use to kind of wipe a space clear of evidence.
I guess.
That also surprised me. I thought it was a clever design. I thought it was well executed. Some of it reminded me a little bit of something from The Fifth Element, design-wise. I guess maybe like the way things opened up on it, and like the carvings in the surface or something.
Yes, no, I agree with you. Their orb of destruction, I think is what you call it. Yes, that did have a certain Mobius, like, it wasn't just a hunk of metal.
Yeah.
There was ornamentation to it.
Yeah.
So yes, I don't disagree with you in terms of that very specific observation.
So therefore, I think because it surprised me and because there were a couple of things that I haven't seen either done elsewhere or certainly done very often elsewhere, I give it the decently high score of 7 for visuals.
All right, some credit for creativity, I suppose.
Yeah.
All right, so we will move on now to Contact from 1997. I'm giving this a very high score. I'm going with 8. I could probably go a little bit higher, I suppose, but I mean, I'm comfortable with 8, and there's a few reasons why. There's some specific. There's the obvious sequence of her dropping into the. I guess they're wormholes. Again, it's a little bit.
Yeah.
Einstein-Rosen bridge is what she refers to them as, which is the technical term for a wormhole. That's the obvious thing, but it's not just about the fact that we're going to show this big machine at work and we're going to show her going through this weird environment. It was little touches, like when she's going through some time dilation and she's experiencing one thing and there's sort of like a shadow of herself that comes over and then says something else. And that happens at a different point in the trip. And that happens on camera.
Yeah.
But it happens at a different, but they kind of show it. The little touches like that are very creative and different. The movie opens with a long special effects shot, kind of a zoom out from Earth going out into the universe.
Yep.
It's not quiet, but the audio that you hear are sort of Earth's broadcasts over the years. There's no space sounds. There's no whooshing. And this also goes to the audio, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it's just a very arresting shot overall. And they don't try to make it overly spectacular. They just kind of try to keep it to what it would be. It's like, here's a planet, here's another planet, here's some meteors, here's the entire solar system viewed from a distance. The movie opens with that before it gets into any narrative or storytelling or anything like that. So I thought that was kind of a daring choice, actually, to do something like that in 1997, and to pull it off is worthy of kudos. Of course, this movie had a much bigger budget to work with, as you mentioned. $90 million in 1997 is that's pretty big. That's pretty high, and they put it to good use here. So yeah, I mean, I guess those are sort of the high points, but in terms of sort of the mundane everyday visuals, I just think it's Robert Zemeckis. So like he's just making things look more interesting. He's shooting things. The little village where she lives when she's at Arecibo, just doing her regular studies. It's just shot in an interesting way. They show a little bit of the local world to bring you in. There's also the sort of Forrest Gumpian way of sort of, in some ways it ages the movie permanently because it's like there's Bill Clinton talking to the characters in the movie, but it's done very effectively, more effectively than it was done in Forrest Gump actually. Some of those effects have actually aged over the years. But I mean, so there's these little touches that are a little bit more creative than just like big special effects extravaganza, little details that really give this movie push this movie to the next level for me. So again, I'm giving it an 8.
I'm also giving it an 8. For a lot of the same reasons. Before there's any talk of visual effects, you touched on it a little bit, but it's just so painfully clear when you, especially as we did, watch these movies back to back, go from one to the other, how much of a difference a budget makes when it comes just to even depicting everyday life.
Yes.
Just if they did nothing else but shoot like streets and houses and just real life environments, it still is just night and day difference in quality and presentation between Contact and The Arrival with just that alone. I guess I didn't realize it so consciously before watching this, but your ability to suspend your disbelief and kind of get lost in the story is just so much more enhanced when you have that kind of movie quality depiction of life, and just a standard, just what you take for granted, I guess.
It anchors you.
Yeah. You see it done differently in something else, and you realize, there's quite a difference. And yeah, of course, building on that, the visual effects that are here, they're not flashy, really, for the most part. They're not even really overt. They're done in a very story-serving way. You're dealing with a subject matter that justifies what the story builds to and what the visual presentation builds to. So yeah, it's really well done. It's really well executed. I will say that the depiction of her journey itself, or her destination rather, is maybe the only snafu I felt in the presentation and the way they handled it. And that's just it seemed like a choice to make it appear a little more dreamlike, but because this is 2023 and this movie's now 26 years old, it just looks like something that somebody could probably pull off on their computer at home now, which is you're just going to get that with certainly many other movies, but again, just the execution of what is here, and the taste with which it is presented are very high caliber, and certainly better than The Arrival. So I stick with my score of 8 for the visuals and Contact. Now let's discuss performances. We'll jump back to The Arrival, and I had to give the performances here a 5. Even the big names, or the recognizable names here, aren't doing a stellar job. Charlie Sheen kind of spends the whole movie with his eyes permanently bugged out. I'm not sure how many times he blinks, if at all. It just kind of seems like he has one setting for most of it. And story-wise, it kind of works because he's just kind of being chased the whole movie and being put in this like stressful position. But we need a little more range out of the character. Even Terry Polo's in this movie, and she's never struck me as this like incredible actress.
Sure.
But and this, I'm assuming, is maybe an earlier film for her. She does not, for me, rise above the level of TV movie. A lot of people in this movie don't. I feel like this might be where most of besides kind of the weaknesses in the visual effects or the economic choices they made, this is where the lack of budget is kind of apparent. There's just not any real believability in the talent here. Ron Silver is probably, I guess, the best that this movie has to offer. He's good in an understated way. He's not like an over-the-top villain. He's a very kind of even keel, subtle, cold and calculating villain, and he does that really well. But man, he wasn't given a lot to work with here.
Yeah.
And maybe neither was anybody else. But I give it a 5.
Yeah, we agree a lot. I'm also giving the The Arrival, a performance score of 5 for all of the same reasons, essentially. Charlie Sheen not showing a ton of range, and it's a very sort of it is not a well-balanced sort of descent into madness for his character.
Right.
And again, that's some of that is writing based, and I'll get into that more later, but I'll kind of leave it there for now. But yeah, not a lot of range, and maybe there could have been some interesting things done if his character had started in one place and ended up in another.
Yeah. And
that wasn't really the case. Again, same thing about Terry Polo, the other supporting actors, and I was going to say the exact same thing about Ron Silver, as you just said. Probably the high point performance-wise. Understated, subtle, well done though. I think that might have been, at the time at least, that was probably something that would have been a little bit more rare in a movie of this type.
Yeah.
But what you didn't get was a lot of just sort of like quiet, political almost personalities that were controlling things, maybe through the technology and the power and influence they wield as an alien species, but also through like his position working for like the science institution and whatnot. You know, he's pulling a lot of strings quietly behind the scenes and not being big and grandiose about it. So in that way, and in its time, I think it was unique, so it stands out. But again, it's not quite enough to lift up the entire movie here in terms of that. Like you said, and like you said, nothing was bad. You know, we always talk about 6 is good, but 5 is just kind of average, you know? So that's kind of where things sit for me performance-wise. Everything's just kind of meh, just kind of there, just kind of moves the movie forward. And unfortunately, at the time, Charlie Sheen was kind of a name. And I don't think that's why you bring him into a movie like this, to just kind of like be meh and move the movie forward. I think, again, like with visuals, the movie was reaching for something that it never could quite get. And I think that this is part of that.
Well, that means we have to look at the performances for Contact, and perhaps it's no surprise, they're a bit different than The Arrival. I'm giving the performances in Contact a 7.5. There's a lot more and a lot broader range of talent in the cast of this movie than there is in The Arrival. And I say broader range because it's not like everybody in this movie is, you know, A-list, award caliber. You have that with Jodie Foster. You have that with John Hurt as well. Then you also have kind of your reliable working actors like Tom Skerritt. Mm-hmm. And then you have, you know, even though he's experienced, I think James Woods has kind of a stigma attached to him. And, I mean, he brings the heat in this.
yes, he does.
As much as anybody. And, you know, it just might be the nature of a bigger budget, higher stakes, higher pressure, whatever. But, across the board, the performances in this movie are stronger, are more nuanced, are higher quality. They're certainly more emotional. I think one of the big contrasts here between Contact and The Arrival is that even though The Arrival has these stakes and these scenarios that are very emotionally taxing and draining and stressful, it just doesn't come off that way very much on the screen. And here with Contact, there's a lot of emotion at play, and it's very palpable, and it ranges from nuance to, you know, kind of unabashed. Mm-hmm. And you see it all play out very well. 7.5 for me.
All right, I'm also going way up from my performance score for The Arrival. I'm going up to an 8, so half point above you, but still pretty close for all the same reasons. You have Oscar caliber performers. You got Jodie Foster leading the way very effectively. Ellie Arroway is a great character and for a lot of reasons. You know, Matthew McConaughey comes on a little strong in his Matthew McConaughey-ness, I would say. But it's okay, because this is an ensemble movie. Yes. So nobody dominates it.
He's another important part of that range.
Yes. So, that's a really good way of putting it, actually. He just sort of, he fills a role, which is a lot of what a lot of people are doing.
Right.
And a lot of the smaller parts are perfectly cast to give, like, the gravitas or the weight or the attitude that they need without much screen time. Yeah. You know, Angela Bassett's press secretary character does not get a lot of screen time.
Right.
So there's not a lot of character change from one spot in the story to another, but she is able to fill what that character is in that limited time. David Morse playing Ellie's father, very much the same thing. You said it right about Tom Skerritt, working actor. Like, he is great kind of grounding things.
Yeah.
His character plays sort of like political games behind the scenes. He's not really a villain. He's just kind of like interested in getting things for himself.
Yeah.
But again, he plays it very subtle. James Woods, not subtle at all. So
Right.
again, you have that balance. Even like William Fichtner is the friend, and like all these other little parts. The one that stood out to me as maybe sort of not making the right choices was Rob Lowe.
Yes.
He plays this sort of religious leader that's
right.
part of the president's council, and it's not so much that the performance is bad. He just picked a weird voice. I don't know. He was doing this kind of like gravelly Southern man, and it just seemed weird coming
Very cartoony.
out of a pretty boy like Rob Lowe. I didn't quite get that, but again, it's a very small part, so it doesn't overshadow anything else. The most of the weight of this movie is being carried by Jodie Foster, and she's doing so in an excellent way. And again, similar to The Arrival, actually, a lot of performance, a lot of the details of the performance, I think, comes from the writing. We're going to disagree a little bit on writing for Contact, but I think a lot of what the actors are doing is based in a foundation of the writing. And I think that's true for both of these movies, and we're going to get into that in just a minute. Actually, let's get into it right now.
Why not?
We're going to talk about writing now. We're going to start with The Arrival, though. And my writing score for The Arrival is 6.5. That's decent. 6 is good. 6.5 is a little better.
Good plus.
I'm giving it credit. I'm kind of giving it some credit in the writing, like as you did for visuals. I'm giving it credit for some of the ambitions and ideas that it had.
Yeah.
I think this movie probably had like a really good outline. I think it maybe had a really good story treatment.
Yeah.
And the details fall apart a little bit. And the first thing I'm going to say is, again, they do a creative thing. The aliens have been on Earth. They're terraforming the planet to be more like theirs. They're not attacking from the skies. They're doing this like politically. They're doing this. They're pulling the strings quietly behind the scenes, and that's interesting. There's a lot of interesting things. Where I think the writing falls apart a little bit. Earlier, I mentioned that Charlie Sheen's character doesn't go through much of a change, and there was a potential here to really have this sort of descent into madness. But the character just starts out as too much of a wide-eyed weirdo to ever seem weird later. At one point, he walks into the lobby of this science institution that he used to work for. And all of a sudden he's wearing like a trench coat and yellow sunglasses, and it's like
he's got a different goatee or something.
Yeah, the character has arrived in this place, but there's been no sort of like movement to it.
Yeah.
It was just this like digital thing where he went from like the weirdo that he was to like the slightly weirder weirdo. There was no like travel between those 2 points.
Yeah.
And so there was just a lot of potential for that sort of thing that was left behind. Again, because I think this movie was not focused on the things that Contact is focused on, which is just those subtle character pieces.
Right.
The problem I had with the writing was it just didn't take the characters on a journey of any kind. It's kind of stayed small, which is okay. It had interesting ideas. The details were not worked out in a way that I found to be like completely pleasing. So again, I come out with a 6.5. Not bad, but could have been better.
I agree in terms of the score completely. 6.5 for me as well. And it's for a lot of the same reasons. I think my instinct was initially to go lower.
Mm-hmm, same.
But as you alluded to, I do give it credit like I do for the visuals because it surprised me. It didn't do what I expected. It wasn't... While it's TV movie caliber, ultimately, it's not necessarily cookie cutter.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a bit different enough to not be completely predictable.
Mm-hmm.
So that raises it up a little for me right off the bat. And I think you're right. I think the pitch to get this made had to be hit him over the head with all these points, all these high points, all these like flashy sounding elements. Yeah, let's do that. When you watch the movie, it comes off almost like they never graduated past the pitch.
Mm-hmm.
They shot off of the pitch in the outline instead of actually writing a script. So that's why it doesn't go higher than a 6.5. I think, most of the uniqueness comes from the fact that it's, like you said, it's an alien invasion movie that isn't traditional. It's sort of the reverse. Like it's not War of the Worlds. They're coming down to get you. They're coming from below.
They're underground,
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And from behind, like you said, they're in disguise, so they wear, very almost reminiscent of like They Live or V. Speaking of TV.
Yes, yes. Actually, and another thing, sorry for popping in on your thing. There's even an interesting element where like he sees another Ron Silver.
Yes.
Because they used the mold again.
Yep.
And that was just like an interesting little thing that just there was a lot of potential there. And
right. Yeah. I mean, it's probably again like you speculate, and I can only agree. A choice based on the budget to keep these moments that have bigger promise so limited.
Yeah.
But I guess part of me is curious to see what The Arrival could have been with a $90 million budget.
Sure.
But what it is gets a 6.5 in the writing from me. Fair
enough. All right, so we're going to move on to writing for Contact. We're going to disagree a little bit. I am going very high. I'm going to 8.5. It's based on a novel by Carl Sagan, of course, called Contact. I did not realize before doing the research for this episode that he originally conceived it as a movie. The development hell led him to do a book. And then I think it might have been partly sort of Hollywood caught up technologically so they could actually make something that resembled what he had created.
That makes sense.
So I think that was part of the process. But anyway, the book is very good. And the movie is different, but I'm not one who gets grumpy about that sort of thing. I will look at two things, be like, okay, are they good on their own merits? And I think this movie is.
Right.
We talked earlier about the emotional journeys of the characters, and I think a lot of that comes from good writing. There's a lot of sort of, as I mentioned in the basics, it's not just about the sci-fi spectacle. A lot of it's about the philosophy of who we are and what we are, and the meaning of life and the meaning of existence, et cetera, through this lens of are we all alone?
Right.
Or is there something else out there? And there's a thing in Sagan's writing that's carried over through like I said earlier, people like Neil deGrasse Tyson called the cosmic perspective. And it's not about afterlife and heaven and hell and religion. It's just about like, we are small and insignificant, but it's okay because we're just part of everything there is. We're made of the same elements. We're made of the same stuff. So as small as we feel, we're a part of everything. So I think that's a part of it. It's about finding connection. Even though like I'm me and this alien is him, we're still connected through this experience of existence and sentience and thought and consciousness. And that's a lot of, and there's that whole piece. Then there's also sort of the directly religious debates that happen amongst the humans on Earth. You know, if you don't believe in God, how can we send you off as a representative of humanity? You know, but then her faith that the machine works and these things will happen, even though she doesn't have any more proof than a religious person might have. There's just some really interesting, I keep using the word, philosophical conversation happening within the writing of the movie between the characters, and growth with the characters, especially Ellie, and even Palmer Joss, Matthew McConaughey's character too. So I give the writing a lot of credit for providing for that depth of character that we both agree the performances are strong. But I think a lot of that comes from a solid foundation of the writing. And I think that is all built upon a foundation of this philosophical perspective that this movie is trying to take that, again, was not common in its time. True. In an era of, Independence Day, which I love, and, other movies of its ilk. Mm-hmm. This was taking definitely a more thoughtful approach, and so I give it a lot of credit for that. So anyway, my rating score, very high, 8.5.
I give it a lot of credit for the writing. I go at 6.5, just like I did with The Arrival. And kind of for the same reasons, but the opposite. The Arrival, I felt like instinctively drawn to score it lower, but it surprised me with some ingenuity and some creativity. Contact, I initially kind of wanted to score it higher, but I feel like whereas The Arrival was sort of constrained from exploring things because of its budget, I feel like Contact was maybe allowed to explore a little too much because of its budget. I feel like when I watch this movie, I want it to be tighter. I want it to be, I guess, more focused, because it is thoughtful and it is deep. But to explore as deeply as they kind of do each kind of area of story across the entire movie, it can feel a little overwhelming. It can feel a little draining, I guess. It's not a simple issue when you have so many layers. As you said, there's morality at play, there's religion, there's science, there's all these seemingly conflicting human conditions, life, death, rebirth, whatever. Like, they're all there, and that's ambitious for any movie. If this movie had come down to, say, 120 minutes, flat 2 hours, I think it would have been just as effective at doing that, but maybe left you with some energy to go home with at the end of it. I felt very meandery. So
you have to have faith.
Yes, exactly. To keep my score description from getting too meandery, I will just reiterate that is why I scored Contact also a 6.5.
All right. Okay, so we have one more category to go. It is audio. Usually goes quick. We'll start with The Arrival. I'm going 6. It's good. It's fine. It's competent. It's completely unmemorable.
Yep.
I could not hum the score for this movie if you held an alien gun to my head. You can hear everybody talk just fine. The special effects, sound effects are good enough. Nothing stands out. I didn't hear a Wilhelm scream. There might have been a Wilhelm scream, actually. I know one of those guys goes over the rail. But yeah, there's just nothing stands out. So I'm not going to bloviate on the topic. I give it a 6. It's competent. It's fine. It's okay.
I agree with the reasoning. I go a notch below at 5, down into the meh territory, down into the acceptable. There's nothing that I say, man, like, this was really loud, this was really weird, this was whatever. I mean, it's all just kind of even keel. I have no idea. I don't even, sitting here right now, I don't even think the movie has a score. I don't remember any music. I remember the sound of sound effects for the Orb of Destruction.
Yes.
other scenes, but that's all I come away with.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta give it a 5.
Fair enough. I guess we're just going to move right along then to Contact again. I'm going high again. I'm going 8.5. There are a couple reasons for that. Much better score. Everything else is fine. I mean, sometimes it's silly to talk always about, like, the audio mix. Can you hear people talk? But there are movies where that's an issue.
And that's important.
It is important. For most movies that are professionally made, it won't be as much of an issue. Sometimes you get the audio, the dialogue's down and the explosions are loud. Sometimes you get that sort of thing. In most movies, you can hear people talk. But when you can't, it stands out. Anyway, that's fine here. What really boosts this are a couple things that I alluded to earlier. One, the initial scene where you have the big zoom out from Earth. You're going out into space. You're not hearing space sounds, but you're not hearing silence either. You're hearing this mashup of Earth's broadcasts over the decades. And as you move away from Earth, the idea is this is what you'd be hearing at this distance. And this is what you'd be hearing at this distance. And so you get that audio. It's kind of a compilation. But it also does get quieter, and it just brings you out to this, like, moment of silence where you're just looking. And to me, it's a very effective, both visual shot and in terms of the sound of that shot is really good.
I agree.
You also have some of those things I alluded to when you have the big special effects sequence, and you have Jodie Foster in the ship, I guess, the machine.
Yeah.
And she's trying to record her experiences. And then you have these shadows that are in a different, sort of just off time-wise. And it's still her talking. That's very effective, both visually and in terms of the sound. There's things where again, she's in the thing, and the ship, the chair has a lot of vibration because they put this chair in that wasn't part of the design because humans just have to think that that's what they need.
Right.
And there's just a very effective, this vibration, and she's shaking and it's wiggling. But again, this is a mix of sound and visual, but there's a moment where like a piece of jewelry comes off of her and just floats and it's still. And she realizes that it's still, and she disconnects herself from the chair, and now we're quiet.
Yep.
And again, just very effective combination of visuals and sound. And then finally, there's the actual sound of the signal that they hear. Very unique, very different, very cool. And but again, not dramatic. It wasn't alien voices. It wasn't ticks and tocks, and it was just this sort of. But it just was different enough, and I find it to be a very pleasing sound myself. I don't have that ASMR thing. My head does not tingle when I hear sounds that I like. But I like that noise in the movie, and I like a lot of what they do with that sort of thing. So, again, high score for me, 8.5.
I give Contact a higher score than The Arrival as well, just not as high. I go with good and give it a 6. My score is higher than The Arrival is because pretty much of everything you said, just the choices and the sound design were more compelling, more creative, more interesting. In terms of score, again, I know Alan Silvestri's work. I have some of his themes from other movies stuck in my head permanently. As far as I sit here right now, I don't think this movie has music either. There's no lasting impact from this movie, which is actually shocking to me, considering the quality of the composer and the director and the choices that these guys have made in the past. That blew me away when I kind of reassessed this category of the movie. So I don't go up as high, I just go higher. Again, it's this movie does, as a whole, does a better job of pulling you into the story, to the world that it creates. And I think a lot of those audio choices reinforce your ability to get lost and believe in that. Because they seem more realistic, more subtle, but at the same time, like, impactful. So, again, I go up to 6, but I'm comfortable calling the audio in Contact good.
Okay. So that is a full set of scores. I think we know what direction that this battle is going in, but we're going to step away anyway and make it official. All right, we're back and we have some final scores, as we said we would. And again, we knew what was going to happen when we took a look, but let's make it official. First up for The Arrival, we have a final score of 5.63. And next up for Contact, we have a score of 7.63 and the big win. Not surprised by the winner here. Interesting that they are exactly 2 points apart.
Right.
The Arrival rounds to good.
Yeah.
And Contact rounds to 8, which again is impressive stuff. Any final thoughts on how this turned out?
I'm surprised and unsurprised. I think they turned out exactly as they should have. Probably exactly as I feel about each movie, which doesn't always happen here.
Nope.
When we try to go through our objective scoring system, or as much as we can make it.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're surprised by the results, but I think these are bang on.
Yes.
And made even better by the fact that it's exactly 2 points apart. There's a lot of parallels here. There's a lot of things that they share, but are at just differing levels of quality, and the scores just really hammer that home. I would watch them both again. But the quality difference is very clear.
Yeah, agreed. I have always had a high opinion of both of these movies. As I said, I had them in the same VHS tape recorded from probably like free previews of HBO or something.
Right.
Because they both have like the radio astronomy angle.
Yeah.
And to me, they were kind of like equal in that way. Obviously, these movies are not equal. One takes that concept and goes bad guy alien invasion, and we're going to make sort of a mid to low budget B movie. And the other one says, sort of benevolent alien wants to make contact with us, big budget, thinky sci-fi tentpole movie.
Yeah.
So they both went very different directions from the same foundation, but I have kind of a high opinion of both. I think I watched them both a lot when I was younger. I've seen Contact more often since. The Arrival it didn't hold up quite as well as I would have liked it to compared to what I used to think of it, but I still didn't mind it.
Yeah.
I mean, for all the sort of criticism we give and we tell our scores and things are high and low, we have that important thing that we always kind of mention at the end of the show, which is the difference between what our scores say and what we feel. And what I feel about The Arrival is that I still like it.
Yeah.
And what I feel about Contact is that I've always liked it and I still like it. Contact that hovers in like my top 10 movies of all time. So The Arrival probably never had a chance. But I'd watch The Arrival again. It's fun. It's good, fun nonsense. And Contact is good, fun, thinky-feely. So that's kind of like where they diverge.
Kind of the battle between the visceral and the cerebral.
Yes.
And the big brain prevails today.
That's what we're evolved for. All right, so that, I think, is it for this episode of Nerd Bomber vs. Movies. Here we are on YouTube. You've already found us. You can also find us on Instagram at NerdBomberPod, and from there you can find links to all the other stuff that we do. For your friend Claude, I've been Just Jamie, and until the next battle,
Aloha.
Hello, this is Charlie Sheen, reminding you to log on to the Arrival website. You want a trip for two to Hollywood and attend the celebrity premiere of my new film, The Arrival. And 2 weeks from tonight, you can see me right here on Fox as I host The X-Files, take you backstage at my premiere party.